They called her crazy when she opened the iron gates of her mansion to children no one else wanted. They said she'd lost her mind, that the grand halls would be ruined, the legacy destroyed. But what they didn't see was the silent plea in a child's letter that shattered Evelyn Roth's lifelong loneliness. Inside those walls, abandoned kids learned to breathe, to trust, to dream. One by one, they turned a silent mansion into a living revolution of hope. This isn't just a story of rescue, it's a story of a light that refused to go out. They laughed the day Evelyn Roth opened the iron gates to her family's estate and let the neighborhood children spill through. They called it a publicity stunt, a temporary delusion, a lonely old woman's last-ditch effort to find relevance before death. The newspapers ran with it immediately. Photos of children on the marble steps of a house no one had been allowed to approach in 30 years. Some of the children had never walked on grass that green. Some of them had never been past the wrought iron gates. That first afternoon, one girl stood barefoot in the foyer, looking up at the stained glass skylight, and whispered, "It feels like being inside a dream." Evelyn hadn't made a speech. She didn't even come outside at first. She watched from the second-floor balcony, hands clasped in front of her, a silhouette in a pale silk dressing gown, silver hair swept back in a braid that reached the middle of her back. She had waited decades for this, waited for someone to notice the space that had never been filled, waited for a reason that wasn't empty crystal and curated dinners and cold hallways no one walked. The staff had warned her. "You'll lose everything," they'd said. "The foundation, the family name, the board votes. They'll strip your control." She had smiled at them with tired eyes and said, "What control is there in silence?" The mansion had 72 rooms, 12 fireplaces, 4 grand staircases, a ballroom so large it echoed like a cavern, even when filled with music. But Evelyn had spent most of her life in a corner room facing east, where the sunlight landed quietly on the windowsill just after dawn. That was where she had been when she received the letter, handwritten, addressed to the lady of the house, slipped through the iron gate by someone brave or desperate or both. It wasn't long, it wasn't even fully spelled right, but it said in thick pencil, "We heard you have space. I got sisters. We're good if you're good." She didn't laugh, she wept. And then she made the call. The orphanage director arrived 2 days later, escorted by a lawyer who looked equal parts curious and concerned. Evelyn had met them both in the atrium. She was small in stature, nearly 80, bones light as ash, but her voice carried. "How many children can you trust me with?" The director had hesitated. "That's not how it works, Ms. Roth." "I'm not asking how it works. I'm asking how much you believe I mean it." And he had answered, quietly, 10, to start. So 10 children moved into Rothmore Estate on the first day of spring. And Evelyn called them guests, not charity cases, not burdens. Guests. She asked them what rooms they wanted. One chose the old music room. Another asked for the turret room because she'd never seen a ceiling with stars painted on it. The youngest, 4, maybe 5, fell asleep in the library under a pile of blankets before anyone could assign her a bed. Evelyn had dinner prepared in the ballroom that night. Not a banquet, just spaghetti and garlic bread and store-bought cookies on a cloth-covered table. She sat with them, her plate as modest as theirs. And when one boy asked why she wasn't afraid they'd steal something, she said, "Because you're the first people in this house who ever gave anything back." The staff quit. Not all at once, but within days. They couldn't handle the noise, the laughter, the toys in the hallway, the crayon marks on the edges of furniture. One of them had muttered, "This isn't a home, it's a shelter." And Evelyn had replied, "Exactly. A shelter is a place you run to, not from." She hired new people who didn't flinch when a child cried in the middle of the night. People who cooked grilled cheese and cut off the crusts. people who knew how to fix a scraped knee and didn't ask for permission before holding a sobbing 10-year-old. The city tried to intervene. Inspectors arrived. Forms were filed. But the estate was hers. The land was hers. The rights, the assets, the legacy. So she made the legacy hers too. By summer, there were 27 children living in Rothmore, and not one of them wanted to leave. The neighbors started complaining in late July. At first, it was small things. Too many bicycles on the street, sidewalk chalk covering the curb, music drifting from open windows. Then it turned to letters. Anonymous notes slipped into the gate. A few bold enough to be signed. This is a historic district. This is a private community. This was not meant for people like them. Evelyn read every one. She didn't reply. Instead, she instructed the groundskeeper, an old friend of her late father who had once planted every tree on the property, to build a bench outside the gate. She placed a box next to it, filled with free books, old toys, soft blankets in zippered plastic. She painted a sign herself. In shaky, looping script it read, "If you are small and scared and need something, take it. If you are big and safe and have something to give, leave it." By the end of the week, the box was full. Not because the neighborhood approved, but because their children did. On the first day of August, a little boy from 2 streets over, whose mother had written the nastiest of the unsigned letters, showed up at the gate with a shoebox full of matchbox cars. He handed them to the girl sitting on the steps and said, "I don't play with these anymore, but maybe you do." She smiled. He came back the next day. By September, Evelyn was waking before dawn again, not because of her age or her aching joints, but because the house buzzed with a rhythm that reminded her she was alive. There were library hours now, art class, a morning circle in the garden where the kids could say what they needed that day and what they hoped the world could give them. One morning, a boy who hadn't spoken in 3 months said, "I hope someone teaches me how to make pancakes." That afternoon, Evelyn stood in the kitchen with a bowl, a whisk, and a recipe she hadn't touched in 50 years. He made the pancakes. She flipped them. They burned the first 3 and cheered when the 4th came out golden. The local news finally came knocking in October. The headlines were predictable. Heiress converts mansion into makeshift orphanage. Rothmore Estate, from ballroom galas to blanket forts. They tried to make it sound scandalous. They showed photos of Evelyn in her robe, sitting cross-legged on the lawn with 3 children around her, all of them eating apple slices and string cheese. They tried to find the angle. There wasn't one. When a reporter asked Evelyn what she would say to people who thought she had lost her mind, she looked into the camera and said, "The only thing I've lost is time, and I'm not wasting what's left." That interview aired for 2 minutes and played in reruns for weeks. People started sending letters from everywhere. One girl wrote from Idaho, "I'm not in your house, but I watch the videos. I pretend I'm on your stairs. I draw your gate in my notebook and call it hope." Evelyn wrote back. She wrote back to every letter, by hand. She bought stamps in bulk. She answered questions. She mailed books. She included pressed flowers from the garden and sometimes her favorite cookie recipe. She never signed just her name. She signed, "From all of us at Rothmore, you're not alone." She read each letter aloud at dinner, and the kids clapped every single time. By November, Rothmore had become something no one could ignore. Not the neighbors, not the city council, not even the distant branches of Evelyn's extended family who had spent the last 3 decades politely pretending she didn't exist. The gates no longer closed at night. They creaked open just enough to make room for someone who needed to sit on the steps and cry in the dark. People came without knocking, sometimes with casseroles, sometimes with blankets, sometimes with nothing but shaking hands, and the question no one else would let them ask, "Can I come in?" Evelyn never said no. She kept a chair by the door, a stack of clean towels, a jar of lemon candies for the kids too scared to talk. She moved slower now. Her body didn't always obey her the way it used to, but her mind, her heart. Those had never burned brighter. She read to the children every evening from a chair near the fire in the library. Not fairy tales, not softened stories, real things, memoirs, poems, history. She told them the truth. You are not broken. You were just dropped too many times. This world bruises easy, but so do peaches, and we still eat those with care. When a social worker showed up unannounced with a clipboard and a clipboard-shaped chip on her shoulder, Evelyn invited her in and handed her tea. The woman walked through the rooms slowly, noting the mismatched furniture, the hand-drawn signs, the way one little boy crawled under a couch and no one made him come out. She said, "This doesn't look like a regulated facility." Evelyn smiled and said, "It's not. It's a home." That same week, the city sent an official notice of zoning violation. Evelyn posted it on the fridge and invited the council members to dinner. Only one came. He ate shepherd's pie at the kitchen table, while two girls braided his tie into a rope, and another explained how math made her feel like her brain was buzzing. He didn't say much, but 2 weeks later, the zoning notice was quietly withdrawn. By winter, there were 43 children living at Rothmore. Each one had a nameplate on their door, handmade, with glitter and markers and paint that never quite dried right. Evelyn didn't call them orphans, she called them owners. She changed the deed to reflect it. She added a clause. This house belongs to the children who sleep inside it. When I am gone, so long as they need it, it will remain theirs. She didn't tell anyone. Not yet. But she began writing again. Not letters, a will, a story, a kind of map. She wrote in the mornings after the sun lit the east wall of her bedroom. She wrote in spiral notebooks, the kind the kids used. She titled the first page, "For Whoever Finds This and Needs to Believe It's Possible." She filled 27 notebooks before her hands began to tremble too much to hold a pen. The children didn't notice at first. She still sat with them, still listened, still laughed, still moved slowly through the garden when the frost crept in, brushing her fingers over the brittle leaves and saying, "Even now, they're holding on." But one night, after story time, she stayed in the chair, didn't get up, didn't speak, just looked out the window for a long time. Liam, now 8, bright and quick with questions, climbed into her lap and whispered, "Are you tired?" She nodded. He asked, "Will you be here in the morning?" Evelyn smiled and kissed the top of his head. "I'll be here," she said. "Always." He didn't know then what she meant, but he would. Evelyn passed quietly without warning in the very chair she'd read to them from every night. It was late January. Snow lined the edges of the windows like lace, and the fireplace had burned down to coals. One of the children, Tessa, 11 years old, with a voice like wind chimes and too many sleepless nights, was the one who found her. She didn't scream, she didn't panic. She walked down the hallway, knocked gently on the kitchen door, and said, "She went soft." That was how they always described it when someone had finally let go. Not gone, not dead, just soft. Like the body had become what the soul always was, weightless. Lang was on a plane within the hour. He'd spoken to Evelyn 2 nights earlier. She'd called at midnight, which wasn't unusual. She didn't apologize. "I'm writing one last letter," she'd said. "It's not addressed to anyone. I want it to find whoever needs it most." He hadn't known what to say then. Now he wished he had asked more. By the time he arrived at Rothmore, the children had already made decisions. The living room had been turned into a memorial, photos taped to the windows, books stacked in circles on the floor. Each child left something next to her chair, a drawing, a button, a feather, a sentence they couldn't say out loud. No adult told them to do it. No counselor gave instructions. They just knew. Lang walked into the foyer and stopped at the edge of the room, the sound of his shoes suddenly too loud for the quiet they had built. One of the teens, Marcus, 16, who used to sleep with his shoes on, stood near the fireplace and nodded once. "We're okay," he said. She made sure of that. The funeral was held on the front lawn, not in a church, not in a hall. Evelyn had once said, "If I die during a season with trees, plant me under one." They chose the oldest oak near the fountain. It took 3 days to get approval. It should have taken months. No one said no to the children of Rothmore, not anymore. They carried her there themselves. No suits, no sermons, just 57 kids and Lang and 3 staff members, and the kind of silence that doesn't ache. It honors. Liam read her favorite poem, not perfectly. He stumbled on the big words, but no one cared. When he was finished, he placed the silver bell from her room on the dirt and whispered, "You still ring." Lang stayed behind after everyone else went back inside. He sat on the bench beside her grave and took the final notebook from his coat pocket, the one she'd left for him, the one she hadn't labeled, just sealed with wax and tied with ribbon. He opened it. The first page read, "You may think I saved them. I didn't. I made space. They did the rest." If you're reading this, then the house is still standing. Let it breathe. Let it become something new, but never let it close. The light was never mine. I just remembered to turn it on. There were 27 pages, one for each child, each with a message, each with a wish, each with a line that ended the same way. "You are the legacy now." Lang closed the notebook and placed it on the bench. He stood, walked back to the house. And when he entered the foyer, he saw it, etched into the wood above the fireplace, carved by one of the kids in letters uneven but clear. "This is our home now." And it was. It always would be. Lang stayed at Rothmore for 2 weeks after Evelyn's passing. He canceled meetings, turned off his phone, and let the world keep spinning without him. He slept in the east-facing room she used to occupy, the one with the faded quilt, the shelf of poetry books, the chipped teacup on the windowsill that still smelled faintly of chamomile. Each morning he woke to the sound of feet, small, tired, eager feet, moving through the halls below, chasing sun, chasing laughter, chasing something worth believing in. He didn't try to lead. He didn't interfere. The house didn't need him to. Evelyn had built something self-sustaining, something that breathed without command. Meals still happened, chores still rotated, morning circles were still held in the garden, and each child still received their turn to speak, even if they chose silence. What changed most was how they began to talk about her, not like someone gone, but someone shifted. One girl said, "She melted into the floorboards." Another whispered, "She's in the steam from the tea now." Liam simply said, "She didn't leave. She just made more room for the rest of us." Lang watched them hold each other together in that house, these children the world once called too fragile, too broken, too difficult. And now they were passing grief from hand to hand, holding it steady like something sacred. On the 15th day, they held a naming ceremony, not for Evelyn, for the house. It had always been called Rothmore, a name etched into marble at the gate, scrawled on stationery, engraved into the mantel. But that was her name, her father's name, her family's name. The children wanted something that belonged to all of them. They gathered in the ballroom, the same space where Evelyn had served spaghetti on that first night. Each child came with a name on a slip of paper. Lang sat in the back. They read them aloud. The Lantern, Haven House, the place with no lock, still home, the gate that opens. The final vote was cast by Liam. He wrote 2 words on his paper, Evelyn's Light. No one objected. No one spoke for a moment. Then one of the teens said, "We'll carve it into the front step." And they did. That week, the foundation, already sprawling in its mission, formally absorbed Rothmore under its new name, Evelyn's Light. A team was assigned to protect the estate from zoning threats, from political scrutiny, from those who would try to fold it back into silence. Lang made sure every document carried one clause, one unshakable truth. Children are the only rightful heirs of this place. He spent long evenings updating the bylaws, writing new protections into the charter, creating a scholarship fund under Evelyn's name that guaranteed every child who came through the house access to education, housing, and mental health support until they were 25. Then he met with the kids. He sat in the dining room, the long table filled with bowls of cut fruit and mugs of cocoa. He asked them, "What do you need now?" They answered, without hesitation, "Keep the library open all night. Let us repaint the dining room. Build a ramp on the back steps. Don't let any grown-ups forget what she gave us. Make more of these." Lang nodded. Every request was written down. Every request was honored. 3 months later, the second Evelyn's Light opened on the other side of the city. It had half the rooms, a quarter of the space, but the same warmth. Kids arrived on the first day and stood in the foyer with wide eyes, whispering, "It smells the same," because it did. They had painted the walls the same soft gray, used the same light bulbs, stocked the shelves with the same books, kept the same rules. Be loud if you need to. Be quiet if you want to. No one leaves hungry. No one leaves unseen. By summer, there were 6 lights. Lang hired a team of former residents, now older, stronger, some in college, some working full-time, to lead the expansion. He stepped further back, becoming something like a gardener, quietly tending, offering tools, trusting the growth. Liam joined him often. He would ride his bike to the original house after school, sit on the porch steps and answer questions from the new kids. "Was she nice?" they'd ask. "She was better than nice," he'd say. "She let us be real." "Was she your mom?" "No, but she made me feel like I'd always belonged." One evening, Lang found a group of them sitting under the old oak tree, reading aloud from one of Evelyn's notebooks, the one titled, "For Whoever Finds This and Needs to Believe It's Possible." They passed it hand to hand, each reading a line, then looking up to let it land. The last page was blank. Liam picked up a pen and wrote, "We're still building. We're still here." Lang didn't say anything. He just watched them write a future Evelyn had once only dreamed of. And the house stood tall behind them, full of light, full of memory, full of the sound of children unafraid to stay. Autumn returned with gold at the edges of the trees, and a softness in the air that made even the wind sound thoughtful. The ivy on the eastern wall of Evelyn's Light turned crimson, and the children watched it daily from the window beside the staircase, taking turns guessing how much red would show up next. The smallest among them, Mira, just turned 6, said the vines were whispers from the sky, and no one corrected her, because that's what they were. Every inch of the house whispered now, not with ghosts, but with legacy, with safety, with memory that didn't hurt to hold. Ava came back that October, unannounced, her hair longer, her eyes calmer, her steps no less steady. She didn't ring the bell. She never had to. When the front door opened and she stepped through, it was as if she had only gone out for groceries, not spent a year building new doors in cities far beyond the reach of Rothmore's original walls. She walked the house slowly, touching the old places, door frames, railings, the chipped tile at the edge of the kitchen counter where Liam had once dropped a jar of jelly and apologized for a week. Liam was 13 now, taller, smarter. Louder when it mattered, quieter when it counted. He spotted her first from the top of the stairs. He didn't call out. He just ran. And when he reached her, he hugged her with the kind of force that only comes from years of knowing someone will always come back. They sat in the library for an hour, not saying much, just reading side by side like they used to. Ava with her notebook open on her lap, Liam curled in a chair with a graphic novel and his feet tucked under him. When he finally looked up, he said, "I left your room the same." Ava smiled. "Even the sticky notes?" "Especially the sticky notes." The next morning she made pancakes, not because she had to, but because that's how the house always marked a beginning. And this was one. Another start, another turning. That week, the house celebrated its 6th anniversary. They didn't plan a big event. Evelyn wouldn't have wanted that. Instead, they hosted an open porch day. Anyone could come. No sign-in, no RSVP, just arrive and be. The kids set up card tables with paper and markers. They made name tags that said, "Ask me what I know." They brewed cider and baked bread and played music from a speaker tucked behind the curtains. One woman came with a child clinging to her hand and tears in her eyes. She said nothing at first, just stood on the grass and watched. Then Liam approached her and said, "It's okay if you don't talk. We've got space for that, too." She stayed the whole day, left a note in the box by the door. "I didn't know what it felt like to breathe without apologizing. Thank you." That note joined hundreds of others. Ava read every one. Sat in her old room at night with the box beside her, the window cracked open, the wind carrying the sound of laughter from the kitchen below. She wasn't the girl from the basement anymore. She hadn't been for a long time. But she still carried that girl with her, the one who had hidden in shadows with her brother pressed against her side, the one who had chosen, against everything, to believe that someone might still care. And now she was that someone, for others, for all of them. The staff had changed over the years, faces coming and going, but the values had stayed. They printed Evelyn's commandments on the wall now in gold script. Feed them before you ask them questions. Believe their stories even if they're messy. Let them rest without earning it. No locked doors, ever. One night, Ava found Liam sitting under the tree where Evelyn had been buried. He was sketching again, something he hadn't done in months. She sat beside him and waited. He held up the page. It was the house, but not as it was. Bigger, brighter, alive. With windows open and vines growing up the side. Kids leaning out smiling. Music notes drawn into the air. A hand reaching out of the front door, not to close it, to open it wider. "This is what I think it looks like now," he said. "From the outside." Ava studied it. "And from the inside?" He looked at her. "Exactly the same." She nodded. "Then we're doing something right." That night she wrote another page in her journal. Not a report, not a speech, just a promise. "As long as there is someone left in the dark, we will keep building houses full of light." She slipped the page into the back of the notebook, left the lamp on, and went to sleep knowing it wasn't finished. It was only beginning. By December, snow curled against the windowsills, like it belonged there, like it had been invited to stay. The halls of Evelyn's light were warmer than they'd ever been, not just in temperature, but in tone. The children filled the space with rhythm, socked feet on old hardwood, whispered jokes between bunk beds, music echoing from the piano in the dining room that no one had touched in years, until Mira, now 7, taught herself how to play by ear. The fireplace burned almost constantly, and above it someone had hung a wreath made entirely of paper hands, each traced and cut by a different child, each labeled with a name and a word. Safe, whole, seen, mine. Lang came by every week. He never stayed long, but always brought something, a box of notebooks, a carton of fresh oranges, a map for the next home they would open. He'd sit on the floor beside the kids and let them braid his thinning hair or quiz him on state capitals or ask about Evelyn, which they always did. Did she wear perfume? Did she know how to ice skate? Did she ever get scared? And to every question Lang answered, gently, honestly, yes, but she never let fear stop her from leaving the door open. Ava was there too, now more present than she had been in months. She split her time between cities, between centers, but when winter came, she always returned to the original. The house remembered her. The walls still bent slightly toward her footsteps. The oldest kids, now teenagers, now leaders, waited until she arrived to plan the winter gathering. Not a holiday, not a party, a holding. They decorated the house together, with care, never rushing, no blinking lights, No tinsel, just paper lanterns and pine branches and stars cut from newspaper. They placed candles in the windows, one for every name of a child who had come through the door and chosen to stay. On the night of the holding, they dressed in mismatched sweaters and hand-knitted scarves. The dining table stretched from the kitchen to the stairs, every chair full, every plate warm. No one made speeches, no one clinked glasses. They just ate and laughed and let silence sit at the table too. Afterward, the younger kids went to bed and the older ones gathered in the living room, curled into armchairs and floor pillows and each other. Ava sat in the corner, notebook open, listening. Someone asked, "What are we even going to do when we're grown?" Another answered, "Start another light." Then another, "Carry the one we were given." Ava looked down at the page in front of her and wrote, "They are not the legacy of what happened to them. They are the legacy of what they chose to become anyway." Lang stood in the hallway, just out of view, watching the way the lamp beside her caught the edge of her face, the way the room glowed because she was in it. She'd built this, and she'd taught them how to build each other. The next morning, Ava took Liam for a walk through the snow-covered garden. He was quiet, thoughtful, his gloved hands tucked deep in his coat pockets. "She'd like what it's become," he said. "She would," Ava agreed, "but she wouldn't stop here." Ava looked over at him. He was taller now, quieter, but clearer. His words always carried more weight than the air around them. "No," she said, "she wouldn't." They stopped at the old oak tree, still strong, still standing, the stone beneath it dusted in white. Ava knelt down, brushed the snow away, and whispered, "It's still growing." When they returned to the house, they passed through the front door just as a new child was arriving, small, silent, bundled in too many layers for her frame. She looked up at Ava, eyes wide, and didn't say a word. Ava knelt down. "You're here now," she said. "That's enough." The child nodded once and stepped into the warmth. The door closed softly behind her, and the light inside held steady. The new girl's name was Noor. She didn't speak the first 3 days, not a word, not even a sound when she cried, which she did only at night, when she thought no one could hear. She was 6, maybe 7. Her file said 5, but Ava had learned not to trust files. Paper couldn't measure survival. Noor had come with a backpack that wasn't hers, clothes that didn't fit, and eyes that flinched before hands ever moved. When Ava asked her if she was hungry, she nodded once. When asked if she wanted to rest, she didn't move at all. They gave her a room with soft blankets and a nightlight shaped like a moon. Mira left a coloring book on her pillow. Liam gave her his second favorite stuffed dinosaur. Noor didn't touch either, not at first, but she watched everything. On the 4th morning, Ava found her in the hallway, curled up beside the library door, a crayon in one hand and Mira's book in the other. She hadn't colored on the pages, but on the wall, carefully, deliberately. A spiral, a sun, a tiny handprint in yellow. Ava knelt beside her and said, "Tell me what it means." Noor looked at the drawing, then at Ava. She opened her mouth. Nothing came. "That's okay," Ava whispered. "You can draw it again tomorrow." And she did, and the next day, and the next. By the end of the week, the hallway was a gallery. They gave her a brush, a full wall. Noor filled it. Lang came to visit that Friday. He'd brought a box of new gloves and hats donated by a church in a city that had heard of Evelyn's light through a teacher who'd once read Ava's story in a magazine in a laundromat. That was how the light spread now, not in headlines, but in quiet rooms, by word of mouth, by whispers that said, "They'll make room for you." He stopped in the hallway when he saw the wall. "What's this?" he asked. Noor looked up. She had a smear of green across her cheek and her braid was half undone. She pointed to the wall and whispered one word, "Safe." Lang put the box down, swallowed hard. "That's the only rule," he said. That's the only one that matters. Ava nodded. It's been the rule all along. Later that night, when the kids were asleep and the house creaked with the comfort of age and use, Ava and Lang sat by the fireplace, 2 mugs between them, one steaming, the other forgotten. They listened to the wind press gently against the windows. There are more coming, Ava said. Lang didn't ask how she knew. She always knew. We'll find space, he said. No, we already have it. We're going to need more beds. We'll stack them. We'll share. We'll build bunks. We'll sleep on the floor if we have to. Lang looked at her. You can't carry them all. I don't need to, she said. I just need to keep the door open. He leaned back, closed his eyes. She'd be proud of you. Ava didn't answer. She just stared into the fire, the way Evelyn once had, and whispered, I hope so. The next day, 2 more children arrived. No notice, no names, just a social worker with dark circles under her eyes and a form in her hand. They've bounced 6 times, she said. This is my last stop before I'm out of ideas. Ava opened the gate. The kids stepped inside, and the light was already on. The children's names were Isaac and Janelle, 9 and 11, brother and sister. The form said they had no known allergies, were quiet but wary, and had been removed from their last placement after a neighbor reported yelling. Neither of them said anything as they stepped through the door. Isaac clung to a tattered sweatshirt, sleeves covering his fists, and Janelle kept one hand on his shoulder the entire time, even while walking. She didn't blink much. She didn't look around. She looked forward like she'd made a decision not to let her eyes fall on anything that might make her feel too much. Ava took the intake form, folded it in half, and put it in her back pocket. You don't need to tell me anything right now, she said. Just come inside. The fire's on. There's soup on the stove. You can sit, or not. You can talk, or not. They nodded. They walked past her like shadows. Lang stood at the end of the hall. He said nothing, just gave them a small smile as they passed. In the dining room, Mira was setting out bowls. Noor sat beside her, drawing something on a napkin with a marker she probably wasn't supposed to have at the table. Neither of them looked up when Isaac and Janelle entered. They'd all learned by now, when new kids arrived, you gave them air first, then time, then something warm. Ava ladled soup into bowls, not asking preferences. Chicken and rice, simple, soft. She set the bowls down, stepped back. Janelle stared at it. Isaac sniffed, just once. Then they ate, slowly, silently. The next morning, Janelle stood in the hallway by the mural Noor had painted. She traced a line with her finger, one that curved from corner to corner, the color faded from sun, and the touch of too many small hands. She said it's a safe sign, Liam told her from behind. If you want to add something, you can. I don't draw, Janelle said. That's okay, Liam said. Some people listen instead. She nodded. That afternoon, Isaac built a small tower in the corner of the playroom. Books, blocks, a shoe, a piece of yarn, balanced like a sculpture only he understood. When it finally collapsed, he didn't flinch, just sat beside the pile and started again. Lang saw it happen from the doorway. That's art, he said. Isaac didn't answer. Lang sat on the floor across from him. Did you know Evelyn used to stack the sugar cubes in her tea tray until they toppled over, just to hear the sound? Isaac looked up. She said it reminded her that everything still has music, even when it breaks. Isaac went back to building. Lang smiled. By the end of the week, Janelle had started braiding Noor's hair in the mornings. She never said much while she worked. Noor didn't either. But the room felt different when they were together, steadier. Isaac asked for more blocks. They gave him all of them. One night, Janelle stayed late in the kitchen, watching Ava do dishes. You ever get tired? She asked. Ava looked over. All the time. So why keep going? Ava handed her a towel. Because no one else ever made a space like this for me, and now I don't want anyone else to go without one. Janelle dried a plate, carefully, quietly, then said, "Okay." Not because she agreed, because she understood. They all did. By the end of the month, 3 more kids arrived, then 5, then 7. And no matter how many shoes piled at the front door, how many plates stacked in the sink, how many names they needed to learn, the light held. Because it was built to stretch. Because it was built by hands that remembered being turned away. Because Evelyn had once opened her door, and Ava had refused to close it. By January, they had to move the art room to the garage. It wasn't a decision made in a staff meeting or proposed on a clipboard. It started with 3 kids sitting on the kitchen floor one afternoon, painting scraps of cardboard they'd pulled from the recycling. Then 5 more joined. Then they started gluing them together, building something. No one knew what. A castle? A fort? A map? By the time Ava stepped into the kitchen with her coat half on, the floor was covered in streaks of orange and green, and Mira was explaining with great seriousness that the cardboard represented hope in squares. Rather than stop them, Ava called Lang. "You still have the keys to the old garage?" Lang chuckled. "You mean the one with the leaky roof and the raccoon squatters?" "That's the one." He delivered the keys in person the next morning, along with 5 cans of paint, a toolbox, and 2 heating units. It took 3 days to clear it out, 1 week to paint, and 2 weeks to rename it The Room Without Rules. Inside, kids could draw on the walls, build with wire, glue feathers to picture frames, fill journals with poems no one was required to read. There was a shelf of broken electronics for the ones who needed to take things apart, a couch covered in duct tape for the ones who needed to sit and stare, a corner with headphones for the ones who needed quiet inside their own noise. One child built a sculpture out of spoons. Another made puppets out of socks. One girl taped pages of a book to the wall and underlined all the words she wanted to keep. Ava walked in one day and found a boy standing on a chair, writing something on the ceiling in chalk. "Is that safe?" she asked. He looked down. "Probably not." She passed him a step stool. "Use this." Later, she read what he wrote. "I am not too much." No one erased it. By midwinter, Evelyn's light had grown in ways no blueprint could have predicted. There were now memory jars in every room, glass containers with folded slips of paper where kids wrote moments they wanted to keep. I laughed out loud. She held my hand. He didn't yell. I said no, and they listened. Each month, Ava read them aloud. Sometimes they clapped. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they just sat in the weight of what it meant to be witnessed. Lang started bringing visitors again, not donors or officials, but people who used to need places like this and never found one. He called them echoes. They came in cautiously, stayed longer than planned, and always asked the same thing before leaving. Why didn't this exist when I was small? Ava never had an answer, but one day she said, "It does now, and you're welcome to stay." And some of them did. One built shelves in the library. Another repaired bikes in the shed. One started a weekend reading group called Loud Pages, where they shouted their favorite lines out loud, no matter how big the words were. Liam helped lead that group. He liked hearing his own voice in a room that expected it. That February, they held the first annual Evelyn Day. Not a memorial, a celebration. They wrote her name in lights across the garden path. They ate pancakes for dinner and wore her favorite color, sea glass green. Each child lit a candle and placed it in the window, and Ava stood beside the front door, greeting them one by one, her voice steady, her heart full, saying, "Come in. This house was always meant for you." Because it was, because it still is, and because the light never went out. It only got brighter. In March, a new child arrived carrying nothing but a coat 2 sizes too big and a single glove with the fingers worn through. He didn't speak his first name for 3 days, but he watched everything, watched how the others lined up for cocoa after circle time, how they took turns choosing songs for the hallway speakers, how nobody ever sat in the same chair twice. On the fourth day, he handed Ava a note that read, "You can call me Ben. That's not my name yet, but I want it to be." Ava pinned the note to the bulletin board. She made no comment, no ceremony, just started calling him Ben. And so did everyone else, because that's what the house had become, permission to choose the shape of yourself without having to explain who you used to be. Ben's first week, he built a sculpture in the room without rules entirely from bottle caps. He didn't say what it was. Nobody asked. One afternoon, Lang passed through and stared at it for a long time. Then he said, "It looks like a place someone could live in." Ben nodded once and kept building. Spring always meant renewal at Evelyn's light. The snow melted from the garden paths, revealing green shoots where the children had planted bulbs months earlier. None of them remembered what they'd buried, but that made it better. They watched the soil each morning like it might surprise them. It always did. They painted the kitchen chairs different colors, every single one. The only rule was that no two could match. One was purple with stars, one was striped like a bee, one was black, entirely black with the words, "I don't want to explain it," written under the seat. That one was Liam's. New traditions bloomed too. Saturday stories on the lawn, even if it was muddy. Memory markets where kids brought something small to trade. Drawings, beads, a good sentence. The only requirement was that it had to mean something. Ava always brought a poem. Lang, a memory. One week, Ben stood in the middle of breakfast and announced, "I don't want to eat alone anymore." So they built a new table, big, round, with enough room for everyone, including the late risers and the quiet ones, and the kids who only ever showed up when they were sure they wouldn't be seen. Ava carved words into the edge with a pocket knife she kept in her desk. "You are always allowed a seat, even if you bring silence." The city sent an inspector in April, not to close them down, just to observe. She walked the halls with a clipboard, took notes on the uneven floorboards, on the walls covered in chalk scribbles, on the pile of shoes near the door that no one had organized in years. When she reached the room without rules, she stopped. One wall was now covered in tape art, another in pinned notes with questions. Where do the feelings go when no one lets them out? What does it mean if I want to be loud and safe? What color is shame? The inspector stood for a long time, then asked, "Who answers these?" Lang, behind her, replied, "They do." She nodded, put down her clipboard, and wrote on one herself. "Who do I become if someone believes me?" She pinned it on the wall and left without saying a word. That night, Ava sat on the roof beneath a sky full of stars. Liam climbed up beside her, 2 mugs in hand, one filled with tea, one with lemonade. He handed her the lemonade. "You're a lemonade person," he said. She laughed and nodded. They sat in silence for a while. Then Liam said, "Do you think she knows?" Ava didn't ask who, she just answered. "I think she never doubted it." They drank, they watched the moon rise, they listened to the house below breathe, and they knew, without needing to say it, what they'd built wasn't a shelter. It wasn't a home. It wasn't even a center. It was a world, one with edges wide enough to catch every name that had ever gone unheard, and strong enough to hold them forever. By April's end, the garden bloomed in every color imaginable. Some the children could name, and some they invented names for. One flower, with petals so pale they looked like breath on a mirror, was named Second Chance. Another with deep purple stripes became Courage Hiding. The kids kept a journal by the garden gate and wrote in it like it was scripture. Each day they cataloged new growth, tiny changes, soft proof that what was planted in silence could still rise toward the sun. Inside the house, routines held like gravity. Breakfast at 8, circle at 9. But nothing was mandatory, and that made all the difference. The freedom to choose where to sit, what to say, whether or not to speak at all, wasn't a footnote in the rules. It was the rule. Ben had started a list in the art room titled "Things I Didn't Know I Was Allowed to Feel." Other kids added to it in pencil and crayon, in block letters and cursive, and sometimes just scribbles. The list grew across the wall like ivy: guilt, relief, jealousy, joy, safety, rage, hope. Some words were crossed out and rewritten. Some were underlined. No one erased anything. Lang came in one afternoon, stared at the wall, and whispered, "This is better than any report I've ever read." Ava smiled. "We've been documenting healing for years. They're just the first ones brave enough to name it." There were now 3 lights operating across the state, and 2 more scheduled to open before summer, each one with its own shape, its own heartbeat. None of them the same. That was Ava's rule, too. Never replicate. Let each house be built by the people who needed it. Let it grow from the cracks, not the blueprint. She split her time between them now, always returning to the original like a tide returning to shore. Every time she walked through the door, something new was waiting: a mural, a recipe, a song written by 3 kids who hadn't spoken a year ago and now harmonized like they'd invented the language themselves. One evening, Lang found her sitting alone in the room without rules. The house was quiet, the floor was warm from sunlight, and the windows were cracked just enough to let the wind speak. "You good?" he asked. Ava nodded. "Just thinking." "About what?" She stared at the wall where the kids had taped their promises. "I will keep my voice. I will not shrink. I will not forget who made room for me." "About how I got here," she said. "About how I almost didn't." Lang sat down beside her. "What would you tell that girl now? The one from the basement?" Ava didn't speak for a long time. Then she whispered, "I'd tell her the world can be made new, and that she's the one who gets to shape it." Lang reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to her. She opened it. Inside was a deed to the land next door. "For the expansion," he said. Ava looked up, startled. He smiled. "They're already drawing blueprints." In the days that followed, the kids made plans: a greenhouse, a music shed, a pond with koi that they'd name after their feelings: fear, wonder, peace, anger, forgiveness, hope. And Ava, for the first time in months, picked up a paintbrush again. She wrote across the wall in big, uneven letters, "This place does not ask you to be ready. It only asks that you arrive." And they did. More children came. More laughter echoed in the halls. And the light never dimmed, not even once. By May, Evelyn's light had grown beyond the boundaries of its gate, not just in size, not just in reach, but in spirit. Children who had once whispered to walls now stood in front of groups, reading poems out loud. Teens who had once refused to make eye contact now led community dinners, stirring soup and handing out bowls with hands that once shook too hard to hold anything. The mailbox out front overflowed daily, not with bills or ads, but with letters from across the country. From kids, from counselors, from people who had never seen the house, but said they dreamed of it anyway. One letter came from a girl in Montana. "I taped a picture of your front door to my ceiling, so I can look at it before I fall asleep. So I remember a place like that exists." Another from a grandmother in Detroit. "My grandson told me about Evelyn's light. He said it's the first time he ever saw a grown-up kneel to his height when they talked to him. I've waited his whole life to hear him say the word safe. Thank you." Ava read every letter. She pinned them to the walls. She kept them in shoe boxes. She placed them under her pillow some nights, not to hold on to the praise, but to remember the weight of what they carried. Because every note was a reminder that this wasn't a program, it wasn't a project. It was a revolution disguised as a house. Lang began calling it the Quiet Rebellion. He scribbled the phrase on the back of a folder and carried it with him into meetings with city planners, with funders, with anyone who needed to understand that this wasn't a one-time miracle. It was a blueprint for what happened when someone opened their door and refused to close it again. One evening, a boy named Carter stood in the doorway of the kitchen, holding a mug of tea he'd made for Ava. He was 12, soft-spoken, always watching. Ava thanked him and took the mug, expecting him to leave, but he didn't. He sat across from her and asked, "Do you ever get scared that it's going to go away?" She took a breath. "All the time," she said. He nodded. "Me too, but then I think, Evelyn built this for us, so maybe it'll be okay." "It will be," she said, "because now you know how to build it too." That summer, Carter built a bench in the garden with help from 3 other kids and an old carpenter who'd once slept on the porch in the rain before Ava gave him a job. They carved words into the wood. "You can rest here, even if you haven't said why you're tired." People sat there every day, sometimes in silence, sometimes crying, sometimes with a book or a song or a memory they hadn't spoken aloud in years. The bench never stayed empty long, neither did the house. On the last day of school, Liam brought home a paper titled, "What I've Learned." He'd filled both sides. The first half was about science and math, and a new book he liked. The second half was about Evelyn. "She didn't tell us we mattered," he wrote. "She let us feel it." Ava framed the paper, hung it in the front hallway right beside the door, so that everyone who stepped inside would know exactly what kind of place they'd entered. Not a shelter, not a charity. A home built out of second chances and unwavering light. June arrived soft and green, carrying the scent of sun-warmed soil and fresh-cut grass. The front yard at Evelyn's Light became a gathering place again, the way it always did when the weather turned warm and the air made room for breath. Children sprawled on blankets under the oak tree, drawing in notebooks, reading aloud to each other, braiding hair and counting clouds. Ava sat on the steps in the early mornings, cup of tea in her hands, watching the house stir awake. The floorboards creaked in familiar rhythms, the kitchen clattered with early cooking, and from the hallway came the softest sound. Laughter. Honest, unguarded, belonging laughter. They hosted the first summer opening on June 12th. Not a ceremony, not a festival, just an open gate, a table of lemonade, and a hand-painted sign that said, "Come in if you need rest." They didn't advertise, they didn't announce, and still, people came. Neighbors who had once watched in judgment now arrived with bags of oranges and homemade bread. A woman from 4 blocks over brought folding chairs, set them in the shade, and stayed all day without saying a word. A teenager from across the city came with his little brother and left with a full plate and a new word for what hope could sound like. One man stood near the fence for 2 hours before walking through. When he finally did, he simply said, "I didn't think places like this let people like me in." Ava handed him a bowl of soup and replied, "That's exactly why it exists." By mid-month, the light was fuller than ever. They didn't count residents anymore. They never really had. Ava always said, "If you ask a flower how many petals it has before you water it, you've already missed the point." Still, Lang kept the numbers for the grant reports. 78 children over the last year, hundreds more in the outreach programs, thousands who had walked through the door, if only for a day, and left something behind. A drawing, a line in the memory journal, a piece of themselves they didn't have to carry alone anymore. Ava had started writing again, not just in notebooks, but on the walls, small messages at eye level, tucked into corners, beneath shelves, around windows. You're allowed to take up space. Soft doesn't mean weak. It's okay if today is just about breathing. The kids found them slowly, pointing them out to one another like secrets. One afternoon, Mira stood on a stool in the library, reaching up to touch the edge of a quote Ava had painted in gold. "I think it's real," she said. "The magic." Lang, passing by, stopped and asked, "What magic?" She turned and grinned. "The kind that makes a place feel like it's always wanted you here." They planted more flowers. Someone donated a piano. Carter led a writing group under the porch. Noor organized a quiet hour every Thursday. Liam asked if he could build a treehouse in the back lot. Ava handed him a toolkit and said, "You already know how to make something hold." Each day brought new faces. Each night the house glowed warm. One evening, as the sun slipped low and the wind curled gently through the windows, Ava stood in the dining room with Lang. The table was cleared, the chairs slightly askew. A candle flickered in the center, half burned. Outside, children's voices carried on the breeze, singing, storytelling, the language of freedom. Lang looked around and said, "You know, I used to think legacy meant buildings and plaques. And now," he gestured to the space, "now I think it's this. People who know how to hold each other, a room that doesn't need you to explain why you're shaking." Ava didn't answer. She just reached out, took his hand, and stood there in the quiet. Together they watched the light last longer than the sun, and knew without doubt, without hesitation, that Evelyn's final wish hadn't just changed something. It had changed everything, forever. July came heavy with heat, the kind that made the sidewalks shimmer and turned the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle and sun-warmed brick. But inside Evelyn's light, it was cool and steady. The windows stayed open, fans hummed in every room. The walls, hand-painted with vines and stars and words the kids had chosen themselves, seemed to breathe. The rhythm of the house changed in summer. Slower mornings, longer evenings. Afternoons spent barefoot in the shade with watermelon rinds and paper fans, and a quiet understanding that rest was also a kind of resistance. The treehouse was finished. Liam and 3 other kids had worked on it for weeks. Measuring twice, hammering soft. They used scavenged wood, leftover nails, and paint that had been donated by someone who'd heard Ava speak at a youth justice conference and sent 5 gallons without a return address. The kids called the treehouse the Watchtower, not because it was meant to guard, but because it gave them a place to see everything without being seen. It became the new place for secrets, for whispered jokes, for reading books with flashlights and writing letters no one ever had to send. Ava watched it from the kitchen window one morning while stirring oatmeal. Lang sat across from her, flipping through a binder full of budgets and blueprints. "I think it's better than the main house," she said. Lang didn't look up. "They built it with their own hands. Of course it's better." She smiled and pushed a bowl toward him. He added cinnamon without asking. That week, a boy named Jonah arrived, 12 years old. No family, no papers, just a note pinned to his shirt from a social worker who said she'd try to come back next week. The note read, "Be kind. He doesn't talk much, but he's listening all the time." Jonah didn't speak for 10 days, not a word. But he watched. He watched how the other kids picked seats at the table, how Ava always waited 3 seconds after asking a question, how the house never punished slowness. On the 11th day, he stood in the doorway of the art room and said, "I think I want to try drawing." The room fell still. Ava looked up, smiled, and said, "Then let me get you some paper." He drew that entire afternoon, shapes at first, then lines, then an image, Evelyn's front porch, kids sitting shoulder to shoulder holding mugs with steam curling like vines. He drew it from memory. He hadn't even been here long enough to live that moment, but he'd already seen it, understood it. That night, Jonah sat beside Ava at dinner and whispered, "I didn't know places like this could exist." "You're helping it exist," she said, "every time you let us see you." In August, they built a bridge across the shallow creek at the back of the property. Not because they needed one, there was already a path, but because one of the children, Sierra, had said she dreamed of walking over water, so they made it happen. The bridge was short, uneven, painted in every color they had. They named it the Maybe Bridge. Ava asked, "Why maybe?" Sierra replied, "Because sometimes I'm still not sure if I believe any of this is real." Ava nodded. "That's okay. Cross it anyway." Kids started leaving notes at the bridge, not in a box, not in a journal, just tucked into the cracks of the wood. Ava found them when she swept leaves. I slept without checking the lock. I said no today, and someone listened. I still miss her, but now it doesn't break me. The bridge filled slowly. Lang walked it once a week. Each time, he left nothing but his hand on the railing. By the end of summer, the light had welcomed 18 more children. Not one of them had left. One evening, a storm rolled in fast and hard. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled the windows. The power flickered, then went out completely. The house didn't panic. The kids moved without instruction, flashlights from drawers, candles from cabinets. Someone started singing. Someone else picked up a drum. Ava lit the fireplace, and they all gathered in the common room. No fear, just softness. Just people who knew how to keep each other warm in the dark. Jonah sat beside Ava and leaned his head against her shoulder. "I used to be afraid of the dark," he said. "And now? Now I know the light will always come back." And she believed him, because it always had. September returned with crisp mornings and golden afternoons that made the light in the hallways stretch longer than usual, softening every corner of Evelyn's light with warmth. The kids began reaching for sweaters again, wrapping themselves in scarves too long for their necks. Someone left a basket of apples on the front porch, no note, just fruit and trust. The house smelled like cinnamon and pencil shavings. The rhythm shifted again. Earlier wake-ups, lunch boxes lined on the kitchen table, the sound of buses braking outside the gate. Ava stood at the window the morning Liam left for his first day at high school. He had packed his bag 3 times the night before, tried on 4 different shirts, brushed his hair in the mirror, and then mussed it up again. She hadn't said much, just made him toast and told him he looked like someone who knew who he was. As the bus pulled away, she whispered, "Be gentle with yourself," too quietly for him to hear. But he looked back and smiled. Inside the house, a girl named Priya began building a map, not of roads or borders, of feelings. Each hallway labeled with an emotion. The art room was safe with sharp edges. The dining room, noisy joy. The stairwell, grief that softens if you sit down halfway. She pinned the map near the front door and added a key. If you don't know where you are, check how you feel. Then ask for someone to walk with you. Lang walked in one afternoon and stared at the map for a long time. "I've never seen anything like this," he said. Ava replied, "You've been walking through it for years." That week, they welcomed 2 more children. One arrived with a stuffed lion held so tightly its seams had split. The other carried a Ziploc bag of loose change and a single photo, bent at the edges. Neither said much. They were shown to their rooms, offered soup, told they could join when they were ready. They joined the next morning, by helping set the table, by sweeping the porch, by sitting on the edge of the garden and naming the bugs. The kind of joining that doesn't need words. Noor started a book club. Jonah kept drawing. Carter wrote a new poem each day and left them in unexpected places, under pillows, in backpacks, taped to the backs of doors. One read, "Today, I remembered how to breathe through my nose instead of my chest. It felt like coming home." Ava spent more time in the music room. She didn't play. She listened. The kids sang sometimes, soft and unsure. Other times they played instruments they didn't know how to play, creating sounds that didn't belong anywhere else but still mattered here. One evening she found a girl sitting at the piano bench with her hands resting gently on the keys. "I don't know how to do it," the girl said. Ava sat beside her. Neither did Evelyn, but she still pressed the keys. The girl smiled, then played a single note, held it, let it go. Lang brought a guest that Friday, a woman in her 70s, long gray hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen the world and didn't need to be impressed by it. She walked the halls slowly, hands in her coat pockets, saying nothing. She stood in the library for a long time, sat in the garden, touched the mural with her fingertips. At the end of her visit, she turned to Ava and said, "I was one of them once. No one gave us a place like this. Thank you for making sure it wasn't too late." Ava nodded. "It never is." That night, the sky cracked open with stars. The kids slept soundly, the porch light stayed on, and the house, as always, held every story without asking to be told. October came in with wind, sharp, fast, and full of memory. Leaves scattered across the porch in rust and flame, catching on the steps, in the cracks of the old stone walk, beneath the rocking chairs, where kids now sat after school wrapped in blankets, with mugs of cider between their hands. Evelyn's light held the change the way it always did, gently, as if the house itself knew what it meant to brace for colder weather and chose instead to soften its edges and make more room. Ava returned from a week on the road. She'd spent days in a city 2 hours south, helping a small team open what would become the next light. A girl there had asked her what it felt like to build something people thought would fail. Ava had answered, "It feels like choosing love in a room that's always expected silence." The girl had nodded once, then picked up a paintbrush and started painting stars on the ceiling of the entryway. Back at home, the trees around the garden began to bear. Mira collected the fallen leaves in bunches, drying them between sheets of wax paper and pressing them into a new journal labeled "Things That Fall But Still Matter." She asked everyone in the house to write a sentence next to a leaf. By the end of the week, the book was thick with words. "I used to be scared of red. Crying isn't breaking. Today I didn't lie about being okay. I stayed." Lang visited one afternoon bringing cinnamon bread and a box of donated boots. He sat on the porch with Liam, now taller than some of the staff, both of them watching the wind knock acorns from the branches. Liam asked if Lang ever missed the version of his life before the light. Lang said, "I miss thinking I had to earn peace." Liam nodded. "I used to think stillness meant something was wrong." They didn't say anything after that. Inside, a boy named Eli had started building small wooden birds in the corner of the art room. No one taught him how. He used scrap pieces, rubber bands, broken pencils. Each bird was slightly different, some with crooked wings, others without eyes, one with the word "try" carved into its back. He placed them all on the windowsill. One of the kids asked why. "So they can watch the sky," Eli said, "in case we forget to look up." By mid-month, the house was preparing for the Not a Halloween party. Costumes were encouraged, but not required. Candy was offered freely, but also carrots, tea, and fruit with faces drawn on them. There were no rules, only invitations. No one had to participate, but everyone was welcome. Ava dressed as a lighthouse. Lang wore pajamas and claimed he was going as Rest. The kids lit candles in hollowed-out pumpkins and told ghost stories not about monsters, but about memories, bad teachers, lost friends, the silence in a kitchen before a parent exploded. They told them like folklore, as if naming them aloud took their teeth away. After the party, they left the decorations up. Carter taped a note to one of the pumpkins. "I'm not scared of the dark if someone waits in it with me." Ava added one of her own. "Love doesn't fix everything. It just refuses to leave." That night, as the kids settled into bed, a storm rolled over the hill. The power flickered. Someone cried in the hallway, too soft to call for help. Ava found them, sat with them. No questions, just presence. She carried them back to their bed and stayed until the breathing steadied. When she returned to her own room, the hallway was dark. But the little wooden bird on her windowsill was still facing the stars, still watching the sky, still waiting for what came next. November brought rain, gentle at first, then relentless. The kind that soaked everything slowly and left the air smelling of wet leaves, of quiet, of waiting. Evelyn's light didn't mind the rain. The kids loved the sound of it. They said it made the ceilings sing. They sat at the windows for hours, watching droplets race down the glass, placing bets on which would reach the bottom first. The hallway lights were dimmed. The rooms felt close and warm. Every corner of the house pulsed with something safe. Ava moved slower this month, not because she was tired, but because the house was steady now. The children held it up as much as she did. They watched one another, they brought each other tea, they whispered when someone flinched. The new staff followed their lead. They didn't ask, "What happened to you?" They asked, "How are you holding today?" and waited for the real answer. Ava spent more time in the room without rules. She'd sit near the chalk wall and run her fingers over the lines kids had left behind. Names, half-sentences, feelings too big for full paragraphs. One read, "I didn't know a house could keep a secret and still feel honest." Another said, "I wore yellow today and no one laughed." Lang visited more too. He'd started working in the attic, converting it into an archive, not with files, with memories. He labeled boxes with markers, "First tooth lost here, letters never mailed, drawings left on my desk when I needed them most." The attic smelled like cedar and rain. He opened a window up there one day and left it cracked. "For Evelyn," he said. She hated when air got stale. The first snow came early, but didn't last. Just a dusting. Enough for the children to run barefoot into it before being pulled back in laughing. Mira drew snowflakes on the windows in dry erase marker. Jonah made a snowman on the porch out of crushed ice from the freezer and 2 apples from the pantry. It melted before dinner. A girl named Sylvie arrived in the middle of the month. No advance call, no referral. Just a knock on the door and a woman from a neighboring shelter holding a damp duffel bag. "She doesn't want to stay," the woman said, "but she doesn't want to leave either." Ava nodded. "That's enough." Sylvie didn't speak for her first 4 days. She sat on the stairwell, knees hugged to her chest, watching the house breathe, watching the others move around her with ease. Then, on the 5th day, she asked, "Where do I go if I just need to sit and not be asked anything?" Carter pointed to the library. Noor walked her there. They stayed for hours. On Thanksgiving, there was no turkey, no fixed menu, just whatever the kids wanted. They voted on food anonymously the week before. The final table included macaroni and cheese, mango slices, pizza, lentil soup, 4 kinds of juice, and a pile of cinnamon rolls that vanished in 12 minutes. There were no speeches, just one moment where Ava asked everyone to share something that didn't feel like a burden this year. "I sleep now," someone said. "I smile when I mean it." I touched someone without flinching. I heard my name and liked the sound of it. Afterward, they passed around a blank book labeled "Gratitude Without Explanations." The only rule, no one had to write more than 1 word. Lang's word was stillness. Liam's was voice. Ava wrote again. That night she walked through the house one last time before bed, checking on every room. The hallway was quiet. One door had been left ajar. Inside, Sylvie was asleep on a beanbag under a quilt, the library light still on. A paper snowflake rested on the floor beside her, with the word "maybe" written in the center. Ava didn't pick it up. She just sat beside it for a while, then turned off the light, and let the house hold its shape around them both.